right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our call. Thank you for spending part of your Friday afternoon with us. This session is Purpose and Performance, Stories and Strategies for Senior Leaders and Executives. And I can tell you from having previewed this content that you're really in for a treat today. My name is Amber Johnson. I work at the Center for Values-Driven Leadership as the Chief Communications Officer, and it's my privilege to know Jim and Kathy, who are our panelists today and who I'll introduce in just a minute. I know we're going to have some stragglers joining us as we begin, but I want to go ahead and get us started on time so that we can get you out the door on time as well. And before we really get going, I just want to take a second and give you a couple of housekeeping notes. If you're looking at the screen right now, you might see something that looks roughly like the WebEx software you have in front of you, and I just want to draw your attention to two pieces of it. First, you can locate the control panel. For you, it might be at the bottom of the screen, or you might have a box on the right-hand side, and you can find your mute button there. It's really helpful if you help keep yourself muted throughout the day, just because that helps us control the background noise as well. And also on that control panel, there is a chat box. It's that little thought bubble icon, and if you click that, then you'll be able to pull up a chat box and you can choose Send to Amber Johnson, and that's how we're going to communicate. I really welcome your questions for Jim and Kathy throughout this, and so please, as you listen today and have questions, use that chat box to send us a note. With that, I want to introduce our panelists today. First, Jim Luedema is the director and co-founder of the Center for Values-Driven Leadership and a professor of global leadership. If you're just joining the call and you can put yourself on mute, that would be great. Thank you. Again, Jim Luedema is the director and co-founder of the Center for Values-Driven Leadership. He's a professor of global leadership and a really recognized expert in the topic of workplace culture. He's also a sought-after consultant, and he works with firms around the world. Jim's PhD is from Case Western Reserve University, and he's been working and teaching executive students at Benedictine for the last 15 years. He's also a leader in the study of appreciative inquiry, which is a positive and collaborative-based process of leadership development and organizational change. And he directs our center's research initiatives, many of which explore the intersection of culture and values and profit, which is really what we're getting to in this conversation here today. Also joining us is Dr. Kathy Hopeka-Hannon. Kathy began her career at KPMG in 1984, and she rose to the top as National Managing Partner and Vice Chairman. She retired recently, but she continues her work as the National Board Chair for the Girl Scouts USA and is a board member at Blue Trail Software Holdings and the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. Kathy earned her PhD from Benedictine in Values-Driven Leadership in 2015, and today she's going to be wearing her practitioner hat to share stories and insights from her leadership experience at KPMG and beyond. Today, as Kathy and Jim share, I want to invite you to listen for what I would call takeaways. Those are the little insights that inspire you, that you know you're ready to put to work. And if you would, do us a favor and share some of those takeaways with us, with everyone, by using that chat function that we pointed out earlier. And again, that's also how you can ask questions. You can direct your takeaways to everyone and direct your questions to me, Amber Johnson. All right. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim to kick things off.
Well, thank you very much, Amber, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you today, and delighted to have you on this webinar. I want to start out by just talking a little bit about what values-driven leadership is and why it matters. And then Kathy and I will get into sharing some examples and drilling a little bit deeper into the keys to building great values-driven companies. So when we talk about values-driven leadership, what we're really talking about is doing business the right way. It's about being committed to your own personal values and then building values-based companies that drive exceptional performance. And that's a key point. It's not just about values alone. It's about leveraging values and culture to drive exceptional performance. So really, values-driven leadership is a combination of ethics and effectiveness, of character and competence. And we like to say it really there are three legs to the stool: working with purpose, integrity, and excellence. And I want to give you a little data from the research about why values matter. And the reason that they matter is that they deliver results. And the first example comes from research done by Raj Sisodia and his colleagues in their book, Firms of Endearment. And what they found is that endearing firms, those companies that are beloved by their employees and their customers because they have a strong sense of purpose and core values, a commitment to customers and team members and suppliers and to their communities, and have people-centered cultures, outperform the S&P 500 by 14 times, and good to great companies by 6 times in cumulative returns over a period of 15 years from 1998 to 2013. It's quite a dramatic difference in performance over that period of time. Some of the companies that were included in this are Costco, Whole Foods, Southwest Airlines, and there were about 20 others. Another example of the power of great values-driven cultures to deliver results comes from Great Place to Work, the Great Place to Work organization. And since 1997, Fortune and Great Place to Work have tracked the performance of companies that ranked high on factors such as trust, camaraderie, pride, fulfillment, and other positive people-centered values. And again, these companies significantly outperform the market, nearly 2 times better average annual returns than the general market between 1998 and 2015. And some of the examples of these companies include Salesforce, Wegman Food Markets, Ultimate Software, and the Boston Consulting Group. A third example comes from the Ethisphere Institute, and each year Ethisphere releases its list of the world's most ethical companies, which considers stuff like corporate citizenship, governance, innovation for public well-being, tone from the top, legal, regulatory, and reputation track record, and ethics and compliance programs. And the world's most ethical corporations from 2007 to 2011 collectively outperformed the S&P 500 by an average of 7.3% annually. Now, of course, we all know that that period between 2007 and 2011 was a rough time for stocks, so let's look at more recent data from Ethisphere from 2015 and 16. And in this data set, the world's most ethical companies enjoyed a 6.6% premium over the U.S. large cap index. And again, examples of companies in the world's most ethical include Dell Technologies, Volvo, and Grupo Bimbo, the great food and bakery company out of Mexico. One more example comes from Credit Suisse, and this was in 2016, and they repeated their study of women in board roles of large companies and found that companies with women in leadership outperformed those with no women in leadership in market cap. And where the gender balance was split evenly 50-50, this accounted for a 10% difference as compared to other companies. In other words, the value of gender diversity has a significant financial return.
Thank you, Jim, for walking us through that. I've seen these numbers before, but I'm always startled to see what a difference it really does make in when companies learn to leverage their values. And Kathy, I want to ask you a question to make sure we hear your voice. I know you've sat on a global corporation. You've served on national boards for a variety of organizations. You've been involved in a lot of businesses in your consulting role too. Why do you think that we see such a marked performance difference for companies that are known for their values, and what is really kind of causing that shift as well?
Thank you, Amber, and also want to welcome everyone who's able to join us today. So, I think the answer to the first part of your question is really not complex at all in my mind. It's actually pretty simple, and that is that values matter to the individual worker. So, simply ask yourself, who would you rather work for? Who would you go the extra mile for? It's those companies that have the values that are lived every day. So, and values, to that point, many companies have stated values. You can just do your Google searches and you can see that. But values can't be just written on a plaque in the lobby. People really do see if those stated values are truly lived and if the leaders actually lead by them. And if they're not, workers will vote with their feet, right? So you won't be able to retain them, let alone get the best that they can offer. So I think the answer is really pretty fundamental. The second part as to why the shift, I think there's a number of reasons. One of them I think really gets to the heart of the role of companies in society. And if you follow the Edelman Trust Index, you can see where that's been heading over the years. And it's really quite interesting to me that when I look back at the work that was done years ago, so in the early 60s, for example, the public society viewed their trust in government was very high. It was at the 75% mark. Today, that's around 33%. But what's really interesting is that the delta in trust between trust in companies and trust in government has changed, so that trust in businesses is greater than the trust in government. So I think people are really viewing the company's roles more in civil society. Now, how does that play, going forward? I think that companies are really stepping up because we certainly have had some very public failures and breaches of trust. I like to frame it this way, that the long-term effects of short-sighted decisions are really being felt. Mm-hmm. And just think about that. And, I think the great thing is that, boards today are far more active and engaged in their governance roles. So you're seeing much more engaged companies. They understand the war for talent. Competition could not be greater. People are far more selective as to who they wish to work for and who they wish to stay with. And I think that's driving a lot of transparency and accountability in the market. And I also think that this speed of change today is really fueling this, right? So we operate in, you've heard the term a VUCA environment, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's the war for talent and the need for innovation is so critical. And then so you see companies really understanding the need to retain talent, to attract talent, and to get the best out of everyone. So I think at the end of the day, as I said, I think it matters, and it's continuing to accelerate. Amber?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that and I think you raise a good point that in this era where skilled talent is really at a premium, this is the point companies can leverage to attract better talent and retain them as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jim?
Yeah, Amber, if you could go ahead and advance to our next slide. I want to piggyback on what Kathy said and bring up one more factor that we are seeing in the research. and that is this notion of intangible assets. You can see that back in 1975, just 17% of a firm's worth was attributed to intangible assets, things like intellectual property, goodwill, reputation, and corporate culture. And that number has increased steadily so that in 2015, it was calculated to account for 84% of a firm's value. So intangible assets like culture and values matter. And why they matter links to what Kathy said. And we have also done a bunch of research here at the Center for Values-Driven Leadership with the companies of the Small Giants community, which are a bunch of small and mid-sized entrepreneurial firms that were on the Inc. 500,000 list for multiple years in a row for their great growth, but also very values-driven companies. And what we found in our research with those companies is that, exactly like Kathy said, the return on values for them were lower marketing and legal costs because they've got an ethical orientation, the ability to attract and retain top talent, as Kathy mentioned, higher levels of engagement because of a culture that people want to work for, consequently higher levels of innovation in those organizations because people are giving the extra effort, going the extra mile. We also found that these companies had higher levels of credibility and trust in the marketplace, and so then they were able to attract better customers, which makes a big difference in reinforcing your culture and your values. And they had higher customer satisfaction and loyalty. They were also able to sell at a higher price if they were selling and acquire at a lower price if they were buying, which is interesting because other companies want to buy companies that have great values and great culture and great trust in the marketplace and credibility. And then, of course, more goodwill from the community, from suppliers, vendors, and so on. So there's a real tangible benefit for having a values-based culture.
That's great, Jim. Thank you for walking us through that. I love the specifics that you laid out, that, it's not just, it's hiring, which Kathy mentioned, but it's also even your sale price if you're trying to sell your company, or the marketing value of it. I'm guessing you save in legal as well if you actually are living out those values. So I really appreciate those insights.
You bet.
I've asked both our panelists to sort of bring some stories and some examples from their work and their research and their consulting, because I think those stories are what really inspire us on how to act it out and live it out in our own lives. I want to hear how you see all this playing out in your companies. So, Jim, do you have a story you could share with us to help sort of illuminate what this looks like?
Yeah, one of my favorites is one of the companies we studied in the Return on Values project, and that is Beryl Health down in Dallas, Texas. Now, Beryl has been purchased by Stericycle, which is a very large healthcare organization based here in Chicago. But when we were studying them, they were still an independent company, but they are also one of those companies that was able to sell at a much higher price because of their culture. But their philosophy was what they call the circle of growth. And Paul Spiegelman was the founder of this company. He talked about the circle of growth in this way, that they really invest in their people, and then the people invest in their customers and delight the customers, and then that generates a return. And then they cycle a big chunk of that return back into creating a great place to work for their people. And the cycle continues. Beryl is essentially a call center. So if you call into, you think you're calling into your hospital, but in fact your call gets channeled to through the Beryl call center. If you want to, find out who's the best doctor to see for X, Y, and Z illness. And so it's a call center that is talking to patients, often in distress, or families often in distress because of health issues. And so what they did is they created a core value of compassion. They wanted their employees to be more compassionate than any other employee in a similar kind of call center. So they hired for compassion, they screened for compassion, they trained for compassion, and they also built a business model in which they billed by the minute rather than by the call to their customers, so that, and their customers, their clients being large health care systems, they billed by the minute instead of by the call, so that their representatives could stay on the line with people as long as it took to really take care of their situation and their need. Because when people are in distress, they don't want to be rushed off the line. They don't want to feel like a number. They want to get real personal attention, and they want their rep on the phone to follow through with them to the point where they get resolution rather than being shuffled off to somebody else. And they were able to charge that premium. So they charged about 40% more than other call centers to their clients, the healthcare organizations. But they were able to do that because of the exceptional service that they gave. And so that's just a great example from my perspective of investing in your people around a core value like compassion, having those people then deliver exceptional customer service, and then that coming back in terms of financial performance for the firm. And during the time that we studied them, they were on the Inc. 500 list 5 years in a row, and they were turning a profit 3 to 4 times the amount of the industry average. So it really paid off for them.
Those are numbers that catch your attention. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And if I remember from the Barrel research, one of the things they did to identify team members when they were hiring that had compassion was that they would ask, as part of the hiring interview, for a story about compassion in your life and what it meant to you. And then, from their responses, people were able to see, is this a team member who could bring that to our culture and that to our clients, the patients we work with. So, that's always something that stood out to me, is how in that hiring process do we ask questions that get at the ideas we want our employees to have.
You bet.
Kathy, I'm sure you've got incredible stories. What's one that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I'm going to pull on that thread of storytelling, but I just want to reiterate a couple points that have been said. So, we've been talking about the challenges that businesses are facing, a far more global competitive landscape. You heard Jim and I talk about the need for innovation, and there's a realization that innovation comes at every level. So it really requires this diverse perspectives and ideas that can only really truly be realized if diversity itself is fully engaged, valued, and embraced. So KPMG obviously has been the top, Jim referenced Great Places to Work. We've been the top professional services firm, and we really are recognized for our values-driven culture. And the story that I'm going to share with you shows how this is from the very top. This is embraced and lived. So. Our chairman at the time was really focused on how do we really tap this innovation through diversity, and we needed to move the needle, so to speak, on diversity in a very real way. And I like to give the definition of diversity and inclusion, and in the sense that diversity really in my mind is about counting heads. It's really the inclusion part that is about ensuring those heads count, that they're embraced and realized and fully engaged. So what our chairman didn't make it a mandate. What he really did was make it very real. He took the time consistently to explain why this mattered to him. Why was D&I, diversity and inclusion, so important to him? And using his authentic voice, he shared a very personal story, so his own self-narrative on this topic. And he focused initially on gender diversity. And he told the story, and he's a white male, that he was the youngest in a large family of 6, but he was the youngest, and he had all older sisters. And he bore witness to the struggles that they had. He told a story about one of his sisters who finished at the top of her class in law school and yet struggled to get the recognition in the right job. And he knew, and he said, I felt like I was getting more opportunities simply because I was born a white male. And when you personalize why it's important, so he said he was very committed to this work for that reason. And we really created a culture of storytelling. And so the entire management committee and others were invited to tell their stories. And each time he would go out, he would be asking for specifics from individuals. He wanted to understand. So he told his story. He wanted to understand theirs, and he wanted to understand what were they specifically doing. So he demonstrated that this was important, and he lived it. And we certainly moved the needle very dramatically. So that storytelling and self-narrative, I think, is really important in bringing the values to life.
That's a great example. And I love what you said there at the end, too, about it really moved the needle, because I think all of us on this call would likely agree that diversity and inclusion is important in our organizations, that building inclusive organizations should be a priority for us because it's the moral and the right thing to do. But you've reminded us that there's a performance factor as well, that you can, actually see more innovation as a result of it. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Jim.
Yeah, I got another great story, and it's from a catering company here in Chicago. For those of you who are from the Chicago area, you may know it, Tasty Catering. I think they're one of 2 of the largest catering companies in the Chicago area. And it relates to what Kathy was saying in terms of tone from the top and what the CEO does. In the story that the founder and CEO of Tasty Catering, Tom Walter, tells is that a number of years ago, some of his younger employees came to him and said, look, if you don't change the way you're behaving, we're leaving. He said, well, what do you mean? He says, we're tired of you coming in every day in a different mood, shouting at us, command and control, telling us what to do, and we want to change the culture around here, otherwise we're leaving. And Tom owned the company with 2 of his brothers, and so they got together and said, look, we need to do something because we're going to have a mutiny here if we don't. And so what they did is they began to engage the entire organization in determining what their purpose was, what their values were, and how they were going to live those values out, what they wanted their values to be, and how they were going to live those out in the organization. And so they went through a whole process where they had multiple meetings with different groups of employees to create those values and then validate those values. They brought in a consultant to help them institute what they call open book management, where they put the financials open to all the employees so that they became educated in the financial side of the business and they could invest more in helping to drive the financials. And so they really created a more inclusive culture in the organization. One of the other things that they did is that once they determined those values, they posted them in all of their meeting rooms and around the organization so that they could be visible, and they would refer to them at the beginning of every formal meeting that they had in the organization, and also then would refer to them on a day-to-day basis as they were going about their work and thinking about decisions they needed to make. And so after a while of doing that, about a year and a half in, the same people that said, we're leaving if you don't change your behavior, came back to Tom and gave him a set of new business cards, and on there was the title Chief Culture Officer. And, he looked at that and he said, well, why Chief Culture Officer? And they said, look, if you pay attention to the culture and you help sustain the culture and you help drive the culture and you make it your business to create a great people-centered culture, we don't need an executive officer, a chief executive officer. We know how to run the business. We need you to really create and maintain the culture. And so Tom really shifted his view of what his role as CEO was, and that was to be the carrier of the culture, the bearer of the culture, to be telling the stories about the culture, to be reinforcing it in every communication and every interaction that he had, and also building it into the systems of the organization. And that turned that company around. From 2008 to 2014, they enjoyed 17% annual average in profit growth, where before their profit had been barely growing, even though their revenue had been growing. And so, again, it turned around the culture because people became more engaged. They were able to attract and retain top talent and drive that kind of performance. So it's another great story of a values-driven culture delivering returns.
And it's an impressive story because it was a pretty fast change for them as well, both in how long it took them to change the culture. They did that remarkably quickly, and then they saw the results of it quickly as well. Great example, Jim. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Kathy, we've got time for one more fast story. Is there something else that comes to mind?
Yeah, there's I'll take just a few minutes. And Jim, I love your story the one you just shared, and I'll just give everyone on the phone call a little homework assignment to check out a Harvard Business Review article from October 2015, where it tells our KPMG story on how everyone was encouraged to share their stories on how their work is making a difference, how we're living our higher purpose. And obviously there's lots of studies out there that show that workforces are motivated by a sense of higher purpose, and that it's really essential to creating engagement. And what this had done, so this is a couple of years old, but it really helped us fuel our whole innovation operations. And what I mean by that is, so we talked about diversity, how voices are very important, how people really need to feel engaged and their voice matters. So the firm has done an incredible amount of work in ensuring that everyone is able to weigh in on and provide inputs on innovation, on strategies. So there's competitions that are created. And folks are rewarded. I have a daughter in the firm, and she actually just won one of these awards. But it's really powerful to hear how it's still people are coming together. You can be a first-year person. You could be somebody who's working in the mailroom. And when we hear about what we're doing from our robotic strategy, intelligent automation, artificial intelligence, having people share experiences and how that could change industries for the better. I'm sure everyone on the phone has a horror story with traveling and air travel, but to have these groups come together and a recognition that it's not just the partner and the manager and the seasoned professional that has an idea, that everyone's idea sparks something, that together we create something very powerful and just really phenomenal solutions. So I just love this culture of innovation that is able to exist because of the value that is placed on the voice of all the entire workforce. So just really, really exciting stuff.
That's a great example, Kathy. And if you will send me the details of that article, I'll try to send it out in an email to everybody on the call along with a link to this recording so that we can dig into the thoughts of it a little further.
Terrific. So a little homework, but no test.
So we have folks on this call who are at all levels of leadership. Some are leading teams or divisions. Some lead whole organizations. As you look across that spectrum, what advice do you guys offer for people who are getting started? What strategies would you start with? And Jim, I'll go to you first.
That sounds good, Amber. Could you advance the slides? Because I think I've got a slide in there that talks a little bit about...
this one, 10 keys?
Yeah. Yep. So I mentioned earlier the research that we had done with or have done with the Small Giants community, the companies of the Small Giants community, these high growth small to mid-sized companies. And based on that research, here are the 10 ingredients that we found were common across these companies that really drove performance from a values-based perspective. Number one was that the organizations connected themselves to a higher purpose. And so in the example of Beryl Health I mentioned, they connected what could be kind of drudgery in terms of working in a call center to a much higher purpose of delivering compassion to families and patients in need. They also embedded core values into the decision-making processes, and I mentioned that with the example of Tom Walter and Tasty Catering, how they came to consensus on the values and they put them up in every conference room and would refer to them at the beginning of every meeting and when making major decisions. And so it was explicit and overt, in their decision-making processes. Then all of these companies hired and fired for culture fit. So not only would they look for talent, but they would look for people that are resonant with their culture. And at Beryl Health, they like to say we like to hire slow to make sure we get the right people and fire fast, because you do not want toxic people in the organization that are not aligned with the culture. You want to get them out of the organization as quickly as possible. Then number 4, continuous training for culture, skills, and leadership, high-quality feedback, coaching, and mentoring. And Amber, if you could advance to the next slide, please. Then another key was measuring and acting on employee engagement scores. So really paying attention to what employees say and helping them get what they want in terms of organizational culture. And then a robust system that rewards and recognizes cultural alignment, systems to provide exceptional market and customer orientation, which is key, obviously, for any business, but particularly one that wants to be loved, admired by their customers. Strong innovation drivers for creating new products and services, and then sustainable financial strategies. Now, it's more difficult in publicly traded firms. These firms were all privately held, but they all talked about how they wanted to maintain financial control over their business so that they could keep that culture, sustain the culture over time and sustain the values that they have over time. So those were the 10 key ingredients that came out of our research with the Small Giants community.
That's a pretty good action list to get started with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Kathy, what about you? Where would you point people to start?
So I'm a big fan with just doing it, having an honest dialogue, being authentic, and being clear on what you stand for. And I'm a huge fan of Edgar Schein and his work on organizational culture and leadership. And I think we have a slide on the embedding mechanisms. There it is. I see it. It's up. There's a number of things listed here. I'm not going to read through every one of them, but I am going to tell a story that highlights how things can really make a difference. So I'm a big believer in that phrase, that which gets measured gets done, modeling the desired behavior and not enabling bad behavior. So to that degree, when we talk about how we allocate rewards and what as leaders we pay attention to and measure, we've been talking about doing the right thing in the right way, essentially. So I'm a big fan of measuring not just what gets done, but how things get done. Now, there's a number of different tools to do that. I was a big fan of the 9-box assessment years ago, and I'll tell you that I actually terminated high performers, big rainmakers. They were having, great results, but they were leaving a trail of really discouraged and unhappy staff in their wake. So even though they were probably one of the biggest producers in my practice, I knew that it wasn't sustainable. So, Jim, it kind of gets to your point about firing fast, but we have the tools to really measure how they were getting things done. So it's the what and the how, actually measuring the values. And I think one of the things is it's not, and I think this is what Shine also speaks to. It's about the consistency of the actions versus the intensity. Now, yes, it is intense that we fired some rainmakers, but we were consistent in how we rewarded individuals. So you could have had the highest values, and you weren't achieving the results, but that wasn't necessarily. It may lend itself to the view that maybe you weren't in the right area. So now so management's now engaged in getting you, and leadership moved to that right space. So, I think a lot of these things up here are so significant. A number of these primary embedding mechanisms, leaders really can, have that responsibility to operationalize, and I think it speaks volumes. And we actually were able to grow significantly despite the fact that I terminated a couple of our rainmakers. So it's really pretty telling.
That is telling. And one thing I always observe about Shine's list is, he divides it into primary and secondary, and the very last one on secondary are those formal statements. And I think sometimes organizations create their values and they put them up above the water cooler or put them on the website, and they make a formal statement of it, and then they think, check to that box and done. And that's the last factor for Shine. If you really want your culture to be embedded with certain values, he focuses on these other things. And your stories are examples of that. Thank you. I do want to spend our last 10 minutes or so just with Q&A, and I've been getting some questions from the participants, and certainly anybody who's on the call, if you have a question, please use the chat box, select Send to Amber Johnson, and send me your question. I'll moderate it. I'm going to start with a couple of questions to get us going here, and the first one sort of takes us back to early on in the session today. We talked about corporate citizenship, and Kathy, would you just kind of define or explain for us what we mean by corporate citizenship and what that looks like as it plays out?
Sure. So I think that, so companies have a responsibility. It's called a number of different things, right? It's been called corporate citizenship. It's been called corporate social responsibility. Personally, I like the term corporate responsibility because I really think it's an inherent a responsibility of companies. So a company is working within a community, right? So they're touching the environment. They are employing individuals. They have a responsibility also to help ensure that they are doing work in the community that benefits the community as well as themselves. They're not mutually exclusive, right? When we think about talent, we talk about diversity. What companies are doing more of today is investing in the long term. Again, I touched on this notion of long-termism early in our discussion, but they're doing things that will help ensure. So take the education space, programs that are dealing with fighting illiteracy. Well, they're not going to realize those benefits for quite some time. The person who's sitting in the CEO seat is going to be long gone, but they are ensuring that there is a sustainability of talent for the future. So building those future talent pipelines. So what are they doing in those? That's just an example of it. So I think, companies do have, I mentioned this earlier, have a greater role. It's being recognized that they have a greater role in civil society, and we can probably tell a million stories about the environment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and that role is not just charitable. It's not we're not separating what you do altruistically plus profit. We actually are saying you can find ways to leverage those two things together.
Right. I think those days of checkbook philanthropy are long gone. It's companies are finding ways to invest with their people, and people want to be involved in the community. These companies that we talk about that are great places to work are very involved in their communities. I think Jim referenced that. And that's, where can we make a difference with our people, because our people want to be engaged. The companies are comprised of individuals. If you didn't have the individuals, you wouldn't have had the company. So I think the workforce wants to be very engaged. So that's that whole connectivity with civil society.
Great, thank you. For our next question, Jim, I'm going to flip back to this page we went through earlier, and there's someone who asks if you would just sort of explain number 8 a little bit more. Tell us a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah, so in our research, what we found with these companies is that they are very closely connected to their customers, and that doesn't happen by chance. They put together systems to make sure that occurs in terms of, establishing direct and personal relationship with customers, having multiple feedback loops from customers so that they're continuously getting feedback, constantly doing market research in terms of what their competitors are doing and comparing themselves to that and sharing that information with their customers in a transparent way so that customers then can drill even deeper in terms of what value they see in a given company compared to the marketplace and the competitors. And so I think the key in that were you on number 8 or number 7, Amber? I'm sorry.
Number 8. You're right. Customer orientation.
Yeah. Okay. So the key there is to build systems. Rather than just sort of taking it for granted that we're delivering a product that our customers really like. It's having putting together systems that make sure that you're paying attention to that on a day-to-day basis, and then also cycling that into your strategic planning process.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking of a story you and I recently included in our Forbes column about the Chicago White Sox. And I know the baseball season is over, but, they're a team that has ups and downs, and they have a fan base that's pretty committed, but there are other people on the edges of it. And they wanted to create an opportunity for an emotional connection with their customers who are their sports team fans. And so they created a volunteer corps, and they look for opportunities to go in and paint public schools or clean up playgrounds in Chicago, and they invite the fans to come out and help them, and they give them Cubs t-shirts, and then a couple players or the GM shows up, and it creates this emotional bond that they say can be a bridge through the lean seasons, and then it also generates a lot of really goodwill in the community, and often a lot of public relations results as well. And that's just one way they've systematized creating a real connection to their fans and having an orientation to them.
You bet.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another question for you. I think, we've made a pretty good case for the connection between purpose and performance, but then there's also the factor of the market. And, maybe, Kathy, I'll ask you this, especially since you've worked in publicly traded companies. Isn't a lot of high performance just determined by the market? For example, if you owned a DVD store right now, this is probably not going to be your best sales season, and you're going to have to make some changes, or your customer base is going to fade away. So I'm not sure any amount of purpose or values is going to make a video store owner successful in the long term. So how much is the market influencing performance?
Oh, but let me come back to that with the DVD store. So it does matter, right? Because performance, you're driving innovation, and you could be creating something new that could be the next best thing. So so performance drives results. The market is not in a vacuum by itself. It all matters. It's all just inextricably linked. So certainly. There's plenty of research that Jim had referenced, and we could probably spend a week together going through a lot of that. So values do matter, and it's how you're defining the market, right? The market is people want to invest in companies. You're seeing that shift in long-termism, right? And it's not, some folks equate it to we haven't talked about CSR, but it's really, what's important to you as a business and understanding what those risks and opportunities are, and you're driving greater innovation. So I think it does, it's bigger than that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We still have the 10 ingredients up on the screen, and the last two are strong innovation drivers and sustainable financial strategies. And those are absolutely vital, but you're going to get to them faster through this. The argument would be you get to them faster through this purpose-focused culture, values-based culture.
Absolutely.
Great. I think, Jim, we have time for one more question, and I'm glad we got this question because we hear this all the time, and I'm not going to rat out whoever answered it or whoever asked it, because I think it probably reflects something happening. But let's say you really believe in the importance of this. You believe in the importance of a values-driven leadership approach, and you want to leverage values for performance, but your chief executive maybe doesn't share that perspective. How do you lead up in that environment?
I think one of the most important things is to build that kind of culture in your own team within the area of influence and scope of responsibility that you have, and then deliver results, and people will look at results. The other thing that I would recommend is educating the person that you work with, whether that's bringing in a consultant, whether that's, going to a seminar together, whether it's whatever the case may be, sharing mini case studies, inviting them to fill out an assessment, that is fun and give some insight into these kinds of things, whatever the case is, to do that. And then also to build sort of coalitions with other like-minded people in your organization, people that are in higher levels than you that can help you succeed and can help drive change in the organization, even if your direct boss is not really on board with it.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that being courageous piece, Jim. I think that's really important. And then at some point you ask yourself, is this a company I really are my values aligned with? And I mentioned earlier that corporate boards are spending a lot more time and attention on culture. So be courageous and speak up and model the behaviors that you want in the organization. I couldn't agree with you more, Jim.
Yeah, and then to build on what you just said, Kathy, then if it still doesn't work after giving it a good try, then go find a company that does have the culture you're interested in working for, because there are a ton of them out there that are doing great stuff.
Right.
That's great. Well, I think we're going to hold the Q&A at that, with that takeaway of building coalitions and being courageous. As we're wrapping up, I just want to introduce very quickly the idea that the Center for Values-Driven Leadership can be a resource for you. Our mission is to help values-driven leaders develop themselves and others, build flourishing companies, and transform business and society. And you will find at our website that there are a tremendous amount of resources, ebooks that feature some of the stories you heard today and that feature Shine's embedding mechanisms and explain those in a little more detail. We have weekly columns at Forbes.com and on our website, lots of great videos featuring Kathy and other folks, and we'd love for you to come check it out. And, specifically, if you're really interested in going deep, we want to make sure you know about our PhD program in values-driven leadership that's designed for senior executives. This is a 3-year program. Classes are held on weekends so that you don't miss work. People fly in from across the country and actually around the world to participate in this program, and we're enrolling a new cohort starting in April. So if you are interested and you're in the Chicago area, next Friday we have an on-campus information session, and then on the 20th we'll have an online session as well. And at the end of today, I will send you a link to the video of today's session, and I'll also hopefully include the article that Kathy mentioned, and also some resources about our PhD program and other things you can check out through the Center for Values-Driven Leadership. If you want to make sure that you receive those resources and you think I might not have your email, go ahead and chat that to me right now using the chat box. And with that, I just want to thank Kathy and Jim for giving us your time today. It's been fascinating. Your stories and your experience are inspiring. It's a good way to end our work week, and I'm really grateful for the time you've taken. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who has joined us. And with that, we will end.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you later, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.